Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of my YouTube channel, Pandemic Programmer, and today we are going to be talking about one of the most fundamental topics of Python, which is its primitive data types. So today we are going to be covering strings, integers, floating points, and Boolean, as well as some of the operations you can perform on them, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and some other ones that you will need to know. So yeah, before we start, I would like to mention that I recommend that you start this video before continuing on to my other ones, because this is lesson 101 of Python. If you know this, then that'll help you continue on to my other videos. So yeah, let's get started. Um, so we are going to be talking about strings first, and then integers, floating points, and booleans. So a string in Python is just anything surrounded in quotation marks. Something like this would be considered a string. A double quotes or single quotes, it doesn't really matter. So apple like this would be the same as apple in double quotes. Don't really think of a string as a word, because strings can also be numbers in quotation marks. That would be considered a string, or a symbol in quotation marks. That would be considered a string also. So yeah, later we're also going to talk about some operations you can perform on strings. So yeah. Also, you should know that when you are creating a string, you want to match the beginning quote with the end quote. So uh, when let's say you're typing jar, you should, if you have a single quote in the beginning, you should also end with a single quote. Don't start with a single quote and end with a double quote. You should keep it consistent. So. Also, if you wanted to extend a string over multiple lines, you can use three quotes. And what that would do is enable you to write across more than one line. So, yeah. The next data type we are going to be talking about are integers. Integers and floating points both fall in the numerical category, so we're going to be talking about this next. An integer is exactly the same in Python as it is in math, just any whole number, including 0, including negative numbers as well, so all these would be considered integers. Keep in mind that strings, numbers in quotation marks are different from integers, so if you had something like this, 4 in quotation marks, this would be a string, not an integer. So integers have nothing surrounding um, their data type, while strings are always surrounded by quotation marks. So yeah, just remember that a number in quotation marks is a string. So don't get confused about different data types. Yeah. Next, we are going to be talking about floating point numbers. Floating points is just another name for a decimal number. Something like this, negative 7.8, 0.4. Any decimal numbers basically are considered floating points. It's also decimals in Python are the same in math. All the numerical data types are essentially the same. So the next data type and final one we are going to be talking about is a Boolean. And a Boolean is just a true or a false. That's all you need to remember for now. Later, when we talk about variables and conditional statements, that's when we are going to be going over this. But for now, just remember that Booleans are trues or falses. And they're used to express the condition of something, usually a variable. So, yeah. Remember that the T in true and F in false has to be capitalized. If you have something like this would not be considered a Boolean. Now I'll show you one way to verify a data type if you're unsure. So let's take 4 in quotation marks, for example. If you were somewhat confused on whether this was an integer or a string, you can always use this built-in type function to verify its type. So when you do that, it returns this statement. Class you can ignore for now. This is just a keyword, and string is its data type. Uh, string's abbreviation is str, int is integer, a float is for floating point, and bool is for boolean. So remember that. Let's try that type function with another data type. So let's try it with a boolean. We are going to type true, and it should return class bool, exactly in the same manner as this did. So class bool, there it is. So yeah, if you were to type type true, with true not being capitalized, it would return an error because booleans are case sensitive. Yeah, so now that you know of a way to verify the type of something, let's move on to the operations you can perform. So yeah, I won't really be going over operations for integers and floating points because those are the same in Python as they are in math, so I expect you to know this already. So yeah, let's go to string operations. So strings, you might think that they can't really use arithmetic operations, but the plus operator is viable in this case. If you wanted to join apple and banana, you would use the plus operator. And so Python, when it sees this plus operator, it joins these two together. It literally joins them. Let me show you an example. So as we see here, Python joined these together and we get a mix of the two, apple, banana. You can also add two or more. It doesn't really matter how many you have. You can say apple plus banana plus cherry plus whatever you want. So yeah. Subtraction is not really applicable with strings. If you were to try something like string minus s, it would return traceback because you cannot subtract two strings. Multiplication is a little different, but still be a little careful about this. You can only multiply a string with an integer. If you multiply a string and a string, you'll get an error, but the thing with multiplying a string and integer is, an integer, you would just get that string repeated that many times. So if you wanted string to repeat 5 times, you do string times 5. And I also forgot to mention that multiplication is represented by this star symbol. The addition and subtraction are the same as math, but multiplication is this star symbol and division is this slash symbol. Like subtraction, you can't really divide strings. So yeah. With booleans, you can't really use these operations either because there's no joining true or falses, and you can't really subtract them or multiply or divide them either. One thing I should mention about integer division is that the result always comes back as a floating point. So let's try that out. If we were to do 5 divided by 4, we would get 1.25, which is a float. Float is another name for decimal, remember that. Even if the answer divides evenly, like something like 4 divided by 2 should return 2, but it returns 2.0. So remember that division operations always return floating point numbers. Yeah, so now let's cover some of the additional operations. These are usually used for conditional statements. There's greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and equals. So greater than and less than can be used in this way. When you say 5 is greater than 4, what you will get is a boolean because 5 is in fact greater than 4. So these operations, these 5 over here, they're always going to return booleans because they're conditional. Conditional meaning that it's either a yes or a no, a true or a false. So let's try that again with a different example. We'll say 6 is less than 5. And that will return false because 6 is greater than 5. Greater than or equal to and less than or equal to is essentially the same thing. If you wanted to see if two integers are equal, you use this equals operator, and the equals operator is two equal signs. So you can do something like 5 is equal to 5, and it will return true. Oh yeah, one thing I should say is that I forgot to mention this operator. And this is just basically a not statement. So what that means is if you wanted to say that, for example, 5 is not equal to 5, and that would return false because 5 is equal to 5. So this exclamation point is just a symbol for not equal to. It returns the complement of whatever you're asking, basically. So yeah. I think you can also use the equals, and not equals for strings. Let me check that. String equal to string, and we get true. So yeah, you can use the equals operators on strings and the not equals operators. So let's try that with the not equals, and it should return false. And there we have it. So yeah. These are the basic operations and some additional ones which you will use quite often in Python. There's some other ones too. These are not used as much. Of course, you need to know them, but they're not used as much as these basic ones. So let's do these three for now. There's some other ones, but we're just going to review these extras. So yeah, this double multiplication icon, what that means is it represents exponent. So if you wanted to do 5 to the power of 2, you would use a double multiplication icon. And so that would return 25. Let's try that again with another example. 2 to the power of 3 should return 8. The next one we are going to be going over is this double division sign. And what that means, what that denotes is floor division. And if you don't already know what floor division is, it's how many times a number goes in evenly into its dividend. So let's say 3 divide 3 floor division 2. It should return 1 because 2 only goes in 3 evenly once. So floor division, in other words, is just canceling the remainder, seeing how many times this fits in the dividend. So, yeah. Now we are going to be covering this last one. It's a percent sign, but it actually means modulo, and that does exactly the opposite of floor division. It returns the remainder rather than how many times it goes equally sides. So, if we were to do 5 modulo 2, modulo is this percent sign, remember that? So that should return 1 because 2 goes in 5 evenly twice with the remainder of 1. So if we were to do 5 floor division 2, that would return 2 because 2 goes in 5 twice. If we were to do 5 modulo 2, that should return 1, which is the remainder. So yeah, now that we've covered operations, how to verify data types, and just the basic definitions of data types, I hope you have some understanding of what we just talked about, and yeah, see you next time. Thanks for watching.